Hello everybody, my name's Zahir and welcome to my channel Plants and Paints. And this week we're going to be talking about the Alocasia Cuprea, which is this plant here. In fact, it's one of my favorite plants in my collection. So the scientific name for this plant is the Caladium metallicum. It's from the Araceae family. This plant can be found growing natively in Borneo, but also is widely cultivated around the world. So it's quite a widely available plant, which is quite surprising because I did have quite a lot of difficulty actually finding one to add to my collection. At the time I actually found this, I had only found one supplier who seemed to be stocking them, which is quite shocking. This plant is known to go by several names, so namely the Alocasia Cuprea, elephant's ear, jewel alocasia, and the giant caladium. This is quite a popular plant within the plant hobby, and it's grown generally for its very beautiful, dramatic, and really quite distinctive, long-lasting foliage. I think you can quite easily agree that this is a very, very beautiful looking plant with really extremely nice looking foliage on it, quite different from a lot of the plants that you can actually get within the hobby. So the foliage has such an appealing and distinctive look to it, with a mixture of a coppery color mixed with a silvery sheen and a dark green background, and a deeply ridged profile to the leaf, giving it's what I would consider to be quite an alien look to it. I don't know if you'll be able to see it in the video, but if I turn the plant, then you get to see the coppery color in there, especially on the more juvenile leaves. So in this leaf, if you turn it, it's like if you were looking at a car with a paint system that changes color as it goes past you. This plant actually is the same, so if you look at it from different angles, it actually changes color, which I think is quite striking and quite amazing. In fact, I've never seen another plant that actually does this. I don't even know of any others that exist like that. The leaves are shaped in like a arrowhead shape. As the leaves mature, they will lose their metallic coloring and go quite a dark green color along the ribs. So along the ribs on the leaf, it will go quite a dark green, and it will get red highlights in there towards the end of the ribs, and in the ridges where the veins run along, that will go a very dark color, very dark green, almost bordering on black. So this is considered to be quite a slow growing plant with a rhizome rooting system. It will produce new plants through its rooting system. So for instance, my plant, just as an example, it has two main plants here, and this has produced it through the rooting system. So this bunch here in my hand is one of the plants, and this bunch here is another one of the plants, and it produced its second plant, which is this plant, through its rhizome system. So when I purchased it, I actually only got one Alocasia Cuprea, and since I purchased it, it's actually grown into two, and at the moment it's actually producing its third plant in between those two, so I'm actually going to have to divide this soon. So it's a rhizome rooting plant, which means that it will produce new offshoots of the plant from the rooting system. So it's not a plant to take cuttings from. You can't take cuttings from this. This has to be turned into extra plants through division through the rooting system, and generally you'll only do that once you notice that the plant is producing a new plant. So like I mentioned, there are two main plants in here, which at the moment it's produced its third plant in the middle, which at some stage soon I'm actually going to have to divide this plant. When I do divide it, I'll do a short little video to show you actually how to do this division. It's also considered to be a perennial plant, which means that providing you keep the rooting system healthy, it will always have leaves through, although many of the leaves may drop during the dormancy period, there will always be a few leaves left on there. So I would imagine during the dormancy period for this plant, I think I got 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I've got over 10 leaves on this plant, maybe 12 to 13 leaves. During the dormancy period, this may fall back to 4, 5, maybe even 6 leaves. And providing you keep the rooting system happy and cut back watering, which we will talk a little bit about a bit later on in the video, then this plant will, throughout the year, it will contain foliage. So the Alocasia Cuprea Red Secret, which this is quite aptly named. I think it's called the Red Secret due to the fact that when you move across the plant, it changes color and you do get like a red to coppery highlight, and also on the back of the leaves it's a very dark red, almost crimson, even aubergine looking color. The Alocasia Cuprea Red Secret can grow to about 1 meter tall and just under 1 meter in spread as well. So this, as I mentioned, due to the rhizomes, it can spread quite a distance, so you can end up with quite a substantial plant. And the leaves themselves can actually grow to quite a whopping 40 centimeters in length, to about 25 to 30 centimeters in width as well, which I'm sure you can imagine this kind of leaf being that big has quite a striking and demanding appearance to it. It is a very, very beautiful plant. As I mentioned before, this is definitely one of my favorite plants in my collection. If not one of my first favorite, then it's definitely within my top 5 in my collection. And as I'm sure you all know, especially those who follow me on Instagram, I have quite an extensive collection of rare tropical plants, and this is actually considered to be, although it is cultivated quite widely, it is considered to be quite a rare plant in the trade. So the Alocasia Cuprea is a flowering plant which will produce a white creamy inflorescence. Now at the moment I've got one here. I've removed the casing off of it because it has sort of come to the end and its seeds are starting to mature, and I'm hoping I can actually harvest some of those seeds and plant them on to make some new plants from seed. I'm gonna see if I can give that a go. But also I've got one of the inflorescence here. So you can see the inflorescence poking out the top. It's a creamy white color. It doesn't stay like this for very long. I've had this is my 3rd inflorescence within the past month, and generally they tend to wilt over and start producing their seed within the space of a week or 2. So this one's opened up within the past 2 days, and as you can see on the top, it's got a quick creamy white inflorescence, and hidden within the spadix, I think that's what it's called, please correct me if I'm wrong, but hidden inside the spadix there is little flowers, and those flowers will turn into the seeds, and I'm pretty sure that it pollinates itself as well, because I had nothing to pollinate this plant and I didn't try pollinating it myself, and I noticed from the last inflorescence that I cut off that it had actually produced seeds, but I left it so long without doing anything that it had actually started going a bit rotten inside, so I chopped it off. But this one here actually has seeds all around the bottom here, which look like they're getting ready to drop. So yeah, it's a flowering plant and it will produce creamy white inflorescence. From what I can tell, it will produce them quite readily, because like I mentioned, within the past month I've had 3 of these inflorescences pop up, and as I mentioned, I've taken the housing away from this one because I've noticed that the seeds are getting ready to drop, so hopefully I'll be able to harvest some of those seeds and produce a a few more plants from that. Fingers crossed. Wish me luck with that. So from my experience, this is a very, very easy to care for plant with very little maintenance requirements. The only thing that I've ever really had to do with this plant as far as maintenance is when you get leaves that are starting to wilt, just wait for them to wilt enough for them to be removed off the plant, and you'll find that if you pull it from the stem, it'll actually disconnect itself very, very easily. But don't try and force them away. Let them actually, you know, get to a stage where they're ready. And this leaf here is, you know, what you're sort of going to be looking for. When they start to wilt, they'll lose their coloration and they'll generally start hanging down like this one has here. So as I mentioned, once they've wilted enough, you will be able to just grab it by the stem and just pull it off from the actual plant. It will come away quite easily. I generally will leave them until they get to that stage. I can tell just by looking at this one that it's going to be a few days before I actually get to remove it. I would like to show you, but you know, obviously I don't want to damage or stress this plant out in any way, especially as it's in flowering at the moment. So I think I've talked generally enough there about the introduction. This, I'm sure if you go on the internet, you'll find this is quite a difficult plant to research. Even, you know, generally you'll put in a plant and Wikipedia will come up with some sort of information. It didn't even come up on Wikipedia for this, so I've searched quite extensively for the information that I have given you so far. I hope that is an adequate enough introduction into the plant, and I hope it contained enough information. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move on to the care and maintenance of this plant. So firstly, we're going to talk a little bit about the lighting. Now, due to the fact that this plant comes from the forests of Borneo, I would imagine, due to the size of the plant, it would be quite a low-lying plant and would generally be covered by a canopy. So in its natural environment, I would imagine it being in quite a shaded location. So I would suggest to keep this, you know, at home, keep it in like a semi-shaded position. Although I have noticed it does love morning sunlight, I would suggest to keep it away from southern exposure. So I keep mine in a north facing window, and in the mornings its leaves do lean over towards the window, but my window is surrounded by a balcony, and even though my part of the building is constantly in the shade, I do get an adequate amount of light coming into my room. So during the morning hours, the leaves there will sort of tilt over towards the window to try and get as much of that light as possible. And I think I've pretty much got it where the plant is actually perfectly happy. I keep it in the corner over here just behind me, directly in front of the window, but it's at a point where the light is shining in this direction, so going away from the plant. So let's say by 11 o'clock to 12 o'clock, that sun that is actually coming in through the window will have moved away from it. Even though it will still be coming in through the window and it will be receiving light, it will be in a shaded part of the light that it's receiving by that time of day. So like I mentioned, avoid keeping it in front of like a southern exposure, so keep it away from south facing windows, because the leaves, although they are quite a robust and large looking leaf, I would imagine, due to the fact that they are metallic, they will, you know, attract light quite easily. And I know that from research, these leaves will actually burn in that sort of exposure. So, you know, try and keep them as much as possible away from a southern exposure. If you've got a north facing window, then do put them in a north facing window, and put them in such a way that by the time the morning sun is passing towards the midday, that they're in a shaded location by then, although they are still getting light. Okay, so I think I've covered lighting there in enough detail. I mean, it is pretty basic. You just don't put them in southern exposure, keep them in a north facing window if you have one, and don't let them sit in direct sunlight for too many hours, because obviously it will burn the leaves, and being that it's a foliage plant, the last thing you want to do is to actually burn the leaves, because that's the aesthetic of the plant. That's the thing that is most interesting to look at with this plant. We're going to move on to watering now. So the Alocasia Cuprea Red Secret can be quite a thirsty plant. I generally am watering my plant every 5 to 7 days, and I will keep the potting medium evenly moist, so I won't leave it soggy. I won't ever leave water sitting in the bottom of the container that I keep my plant in, but I will keep it evenly moist. So regular watering, like I mentioned, I'm going through mine at the moment, particularly during the growing season. I'm watering it every 5 to 7 days. I water all of my plants with filtered water, so I will leave my filtered water to get to room temperature. Usually I'll prepare my water the day before if I know a plant needs to be watered, which for me in my case is every day. So every day, twice a day, I'm preparing water. So I will prepare water in the evening for the following morning, and then in the morning I will prepare water again for when I get home. So that water will cover my humidifier and watering, and on average I'm probably producing about 12 pints of filtered water per day. So watering, let your water get to room temperature. Do try and use filtered water, because you know any chemicals and stuff in the water will actually leave burn marks on your leaves, because you know the only way that it can get rid of them is try and take them into the leaves and try and make them evaporate. But the kind of things that will contaminate the water are quite heavy, so plants generally would struggle to get rid of those, and they actually end up in the leaves, around the tips of the leaves, and they'll actually end up leaving burn marks on there. You can generally tell the difference between a chemical burn mark on a plant and the kind of burn marks you get from sun. So just be aware of the fact that, you know, the environment that this comes from, it naturally is getting filtered water anyway, because the rainforest is producing, you know, a healthy watering system for the plants. It has its own microclimate, if you like. So just make sure you're using filtered water. Water it as often as required. Let the soil slightly dry out between watering, although don't let it totally dry out, because it's a rhizome rooting system. The last thing you want to do is to let the roots start drying out, because they are quite a chunky rooting system in there, and you know, for them to dry out means that it would have to produce new roots for the plant, and you know, the plant will go into shock, and it will stunt the growth rate of the plant and possibly even kill the plant. So you know, do keep it evenly moist throughout. So I've spoken about watering there quite extensively. I think that I've covered everything that needs to be said with watering. You know, as I mentioned with the previous thing that I spoke about, which was lighting, watering again is quite a basic fundamental for your plant. So providing you are using something like filtered water or even rainwater, then you should actually be fine, providing you're not over watering your plant. So the next thing we're going to talk about is potting mix. So due to the fact that you need to keep it quite moist, I generally just use a well draining potting mix with a mixture of a very fertile soil, because this plant does like a very nutrient rich soil. So I will use Baby Bio houseplant soil for this, and I will mix it with a generous amount of perlite. I'll pull the pot out just so I can show you exactly what I'm talking about. So in there, I don't know if you can see, but I've got a very generous amount of perlite in there. So I would suggest probably about 50% I've got in there mixed with the soil. This plant was quite recently repotted as well, due to the fact that I like to keep the soil quite rich in nutrient, and baby bio soil comes with preloaded nutrients in the soil. So I'd imagine I'll probably repot this again every year, just to make sure that you know, it's not devoid of any nutrients that the plant actually needs. So as I mentioned, with the potting mix, just use a soil which is well draining. As I mentioned, I use baby bio house plant potting soil for this, and mix it with a generous amount of perlite, and also use a very fertile soil. If you're not going to use the soil that I've mentioned, that is quite an important thing to keep a healthy looking plant where this plant is concerned, because it is quite nutrient dependent due to the kind of leaves that it grows, and you know, the way that these leaves are created, the coloration in them and everything. It will need a particular amount of nutrient to be able to keep replicating that. So I've talked a bit about the potting mix there. So I think due to the fact that I've just spoken about the nutrients that is required by the plant, and if you're not going to use the potting soil that I've mentioned, which you know is totally your own choice, then obviously you're going to have to fertilize the plant. Now with this potting soil that I use, after 3 months the nutrients that are in there will have actually been depleted. So from that point I will actually start using my own fertilizer. I use a general houseplant fertilizer, so sometimes I'll use baby bio, sometimes I'll use Westland, depending on what's at hand. But with this one I generally will stick with baby bio because it's something that it's going to be used to. So as far as fertilizing the plant, I will fertilize the plant after the 3-month period where the fertilizer in here has actually finished. I will fertilize it once a month, so watering every week, and then on the 4th week I will add fertilizer, and I will add that fertilizer at half the dilution rate that is recommended. Now I don't know how you feel about it, but generally I've never used a houseplant fertilizer at the rate of fertilization that the company actually suggests. I think that it you know, leans towards a build-up of excess fertilizer within the potting medium, and obviously the companies that produce these things, they want you to use them as quick as possible so that you're buying more and more of their products. But I think with a plant as thirsty as this for fertilizer, I think 50% of the recommended dose is actually enough for it. I've, you know, over the time period that I've had it, and the fact that I would fertilize it at about 50% of what the recommended dose is, and how healthy my plant is looking, which I'm sure you'll agree, I think that it seems to be about the right amount. So like I mentioned, fertilizing your plant, you probably want to fertilize it about once a month. Use 50% of what is recommended from the manufacturer for the fertilizer. I would never really suggest to use the whole amount, because like I mentioned, you could get a buildup of salts in the soil which the plant would find very difficult to get rid of, and the more you actually put in there, the more stress it's going to put the plant under. So don't over fertilize your plant basically. Okay, so we've talked about fertilizer there, so I'm going to move on now to temperatures. Now, due to the fact that this plant comes from Borneo in particular, it's quite a hot country, so it loves high humidity. It lives within a forest area, and as I mentioned earlier, that creates its own microclimate, which in turn would actually require it to be quite a high humidity. Now, this plant thrives and absolutely loves to be in humidity level of about 75%, although it will tolerate it being a lot lower than that for you to get, you know, extra plants sprouting out of it, and for you to get quite lush growth coming forward, just like I have on my plant. Try and keep it as close to that as possible. This plant lives about a meter away from my humidifier, so it's constantly in a very humid environment. So as I mentioned, I use a humidifier. The other ways that you can raise the humidity for your plant is you can use a mister. So mist your plant regularly. I actually mist my plants every day, some of them, and some of them every few days. This plant is one of the plants that actually ends up being misted virtually every day, providing I remember to do it. I will always mist my plants early in the morning, so when I'm getting up for work, once I've had my shower and everything, I will then come and mist my plants to try and replicate that early morning dew that plants will get in a humid environment. That way, by sort of the midday, any moisture on the leaves should have dried up. You will get quite unsightly watermarks on the leaves, which, you know, a little microfiber cloth and some filtered water on there just to wipe the leaves down will quickly remedy. I do actually wipe this plant down about once a fortnight just to make sure that it's not got excessive dust buildup and things like that, just to make sure that the leaves can actually breathe properly. I've talked about humidity there. So as I mentioned, keep your humidity as high as possible. If you have a humidifier, then keep it quite close to the humidifier. My plant actually loves being near the humidifier. I didn't initially start it living by the humidifier, and its growth rate was quite slow, and when I did decide to move it closer to the humidifier, the growth rate just increased exponentially, and I was noticing new growth on quite a regular basis. So I definitely do know that it is very beneficial to the plant. So I think I've covered pretty much everything there as far as care and maintenance of the plant goes. What I'm going to do, I'm going to give a special mention to the fact that this plant is actually a toxic plant. So it's toxic to humans, and it's actually toxic to pets as well. So it's toxic to your cats and dogs. If you're a pet keeper and you have this plant and your pet is the type of pet to like to have a little nibble or get a bit too uncomfortably close to your plants, and I would suggest that you keep this plant out of reach of your pets. It actually contains calcium oxalate crystals, which are a mouth and esophagus irritant, and your cat can actually, and your dog, I always put cats first because I have a cat in my house. I love my cat to bits. He's just out on the balcony getting a bit of fresh air. But my cat is not partial to my plants. As I've mentioned in a previous couple of videos, there literally are 2 plants in my house that my cat is attracted to. All the rest of my plants he generally leaves alone. One of the plants that he's attracted to is here on my left hand side, which is my Walksawixii Calathea. I think I pronounced that correctly. And also my Medallion Calathea, which is over to the right hand side there. And generally the only reason he bothers those 2 plants is because they're in areas where he sits. But all of my other plants, they're generally grouped together quite close, and this one's towards the back of that group, so it can't actually get to it. Although my cat, other than those 2 plants I mentioned, it doesn't actually bother anything. So as I mentioned, this plant, it can actually cause quite a lot of distress to your cat or your dog, sorry. They're equally, you know, mentionable. And obviously your pets, they have no way of telling you that there's been an issue. So just be aware that, you know, if you're keeping this plant and your pet is quite partial to messing around with your plants, then do keep this out of reach. And also, I can't imagine anyone actually trying to ingest this plant, but if you've got kids around the house and they fiddle around and, you know, they rip the leaf, and, you know, some of the juices, let's say, from the leaf or any of the fibers from the leaves are left on their hands, and then they end up putting their fingers in their mouths, this can actually cause quite a lot of distress to them, and, you know, swelling of the tongue, swelling of the esophagus. You know, they could end up finding it quite difficult to breathe, and so on and so forth. So as I mentioned, I think that is worth me mentioning, just for those people who have or are thinking about adding this plant to their collection. Okay, so I think I've generally covered everything with this plant today. The reason I did this video today is again due to my Instagram account. I generally will put up a vote every week of 3 different plants to vote for, which people would like to learn something about. The Alocasia Cuprea Red Secret was one of those plants. The other was the Philodendron Brazil, and the Golden Pothos was the third one, and this won by 1 vote. So hence the reason I'm doing this plant this week. I hope you've enjoyed my video today. Thank you all for tuning in again. I really appreciate the support that you've been showing me with my videos. I seem to be gaining new subscribers on a weekly basis at the moment. In fact, this week I gained almost 20 new subscribers. I really appreciate that. I appreciate all the support I'm getting from my Instagram people as well, who are putting in the votes and paying a lot of attention to my Instagram feed. If you're not familiar with my Instagram feed, then that is also Plants and Paints, so plants_and_paints, and you can see my full collection of my plants on Instagram, and also you can get involved in the votes that I put out every week to choose which plant that I'm going to make my next video on. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. If you have, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed to my channel already, then please subscribe to my channel so that you can receive notifications of future videos that I release. I generally try to release a video on a weekly basis. There's only been 1 occasion where I haven't done that so far. And also please leave a comment in the comment box if you've enjoyed the video, or if there's something that I've missed and there's some more information that you want to know about this plant, please don't hesitate to let me know. And also, if I've made any mistakes, please leave that in the comment box, because you know I like to know if I've said or done something wrong, and you know I try to make my research as fluent as possible and give you as much good information as I can. So as I mentioned, I really hope you enjoyed today's video. I actually really enjoyed making this video today, because as I mentioned earlier, this is one of my favorite plants, and you know, given the opportunity to learn a little bit more about it myself has been really good. So thank you everyone for tuning in. I'm going to do a video very soon about some new stock that I've just got in. I'm actually going to be selling plants as well, so I've got a whole bunch of rare tropical plants from Indonesia shipped into me, and some really beautiful stuff. So in the very near future, I'm going to do a video on those plants, and I really do have some special plants here. And if you want to see a little bit more about that, then do pop over to my Instagram page and you'll see some of those plants, because I've already posted some pictures up there and requested for people to message me should they want to know any information about the sale of these plants. Thank you everyone for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed my video today. I look forward to making another video for you next week, and I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye bye.